So last year, I had done a video on the band Helmet and Meantime. The link is down below if you guys want to go check it out. It was honestly one of my most popular and well-received videos I've done most recently. It probably wasn't as popular though as that Kid Rock video I put out a couple weeks ago. In that Helmet video I asked you guys if you wanted me to continue talking about Helmet and covering their album Betty, and overwhelmingly you guys said yes. So making good on my promise, let's talk about what many fans consider to be Helmet's best work. Let me know in the comment section if you guys want me to do any more Helmet in the future. Before we get started, be sure to hit the bell notification icon and put all notifications on. I hear from a lot of my subscribers that they don't even get notifications when I post my videos. I would greatly appreciate if you guys did that. In addition to, of course, watching my videos and sharing my content. Helmet never did things the way they were supposed to. While the early 90s music industry was obsessed with image and hype, Helmet stood out by rejecting the typical rock and roll persona, instead focusing on their music and craft. Frontman Page Hamilton's path was far from ordinary. He grew up in a small Oregon town. He worked odd jobs and even had a traditional music education before he moved to New York City to study jazz guitar. Influenced by everything from Led Zeppelin to John Coltrane, Hamilton blended his love of rock's intensity with jazz's complexity, eventually forming Helmet by the late 80s. He found the other members mostly through the Classifieds. The band's sound was a stop-start sledgehammer of odd time signatures, unconventional tunings, and a refusal to chase trends. Their debut, Strap It On, was a raw mix of noise rock, punk, and metal, earning them a lot of underground buzz.
The angry and young!
As the music landscape shifted from hair metal to alternative rock and so-called grunge music, they released their follow-up titled Meantime, and it was about half written after they finished their first album. Strap It On was released by Amphetamine Reptile Records, and by the time they started working on their second record, Meantime, their deal with Amphetamine Reptile was in limbo. Originally, Amphetamine Reptile Records had a distribution deal with Rough Trade, but that had since fallen apart. But the timing seemed to favor the band, as soon enough they became a hot commodity with over 20 labels fighting to sign them. They nabbed $1 million recording contract with Interscope, something that was pretty unheard of at the time. They were quickly dubbed as the next Nirvana, and some people wrote off their deal with Interscope as proof of how ridiculous the search for the next Nirvana had gotten. Even Hamilton admitted the ridiculousness, telling the Grand Rapids Press all these labels wanted to romance us after Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit began selling millions of copies. It was fun to watch it explode. As the band saw it, they were just happy to have enough money to afford sneakers and pay their rent. Their first release for Interscope became 1992's Meantime, and it brought them mainstream attention with the track Unsung. But the band always preferred to stay on the outskirts, focusing on making music on their own terms. Hamilton told Rolling Stone in 2015, "More than anything else, the creative control part of our contract was what made me want to send Nirvana a fruit basket. They were so successful and it changed the landscape so much that the labels were now trusting bands like us with their own music," which was great because that was the only part I cared about. I didn't give a shit about videos. I didn't give a shit about the print ads or commercials or any of that stuff. It didn't interest me. I figured we were never going to be really a mainstream band anyways. Helmet's rise set the stage for their next chapter, a band at the crossroads of underground credibility and major label expectations, ready to push their sound even further with their follow-up 1994's Betty. The success of Meantime meant that people were eagerly anticipating what the band was going to do next. Hamilton told Louder Sound, "We had a gold record," referring to Meantime, "and a Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance for crossover hit in the meantime. Tommy Lee and Billy Idol liked our band. We were doing pretty well. We were this underground New York band, a mix of metal and noise, and we were hot. Everybody was interested. When we made Meantime, there was no pressure, but with 1994's follow-up Betty, everybody had an opinion." He remarked in one interview how the record label thought of Helmet as Guns N' Roses. They looked at the charts and saw groups like Stone Temple Pilots having a ton of success and asking the members of Helmet why they couldn't do that. Hamilton was left wondering if the label would even listen to their albums, with their goal from day one being not to appeal to the masses. The label then brought up who was going to produce their next record. It was a strange question given that Helmet produced Meantime themselves, with Hamilton later remarking how Betty was perhaps the most stressful album of the band's career given the circumstances. Before they even hit the studio to record their follow-up record, things were already stressful in 1993 for the band. Original guitarist Peter Mengiday was fired from the group. Hamilton admitted that Mengiday struggled to keep up with the band's musical vision and was jealous of Hamilton, telling Rolling Stone, "My take on it is that he became resentful of the fact that I was writing the songs that three of us were capable of playing and he wasn't as capable. A good musical thing can't survive in that kind of vibe." Mengiday, meanwhile, told Rolling Stone that the band failed to supply accounting documents and they were withholding royalties, further adding that when he was kicked out of the band, he was only offered $6,000 and 6 months of health insurance. Bogdan added to the Fort Worth Telegram about Peter, he thinks he deserves his share of the contract even though he didn't play on Betty and isn't going to be playing on the next record. Helmet soon enlisted guitarist Rob Echeverria, a longtime Helmet fan, who used to practice guitar by listening to Helmet albums. The band jokingly referred to him as the group's sex symbol with his tattoos and muscles. Now, there were three differences between Betty and Meantime. One was that Hamilton, who was a control freak, at least that's how the press painted him initially, was more open to taking input from his bandmates. Bogdan wrote the music for 2 songs on Betty, including Rolo and The Silver Hawaiian, with him adding, "I sort of got off my butt and tried my hand at songwriting. I just got bored with not having as much involvement in the music as I wanted." Bogdan, a self-described fan of punk and country as well as Hawaiian music, added, "I see Helmet as a band that came out of the 1980s post-punk period. Bands like Joy Division and Killing Joke. That's where I matured as a young adult and everything sort of came together after that." The second difference was that, according to the band's drummer John Stanier, who told Modern Drummer in 1995, the band was really rushed in making Betty. They had toured behind Meantime for about 18 months, and they hadn't written any new music for the album while they were on the road. The members were also going through their own personal things in their lives without elaborating any further. He added, "It would have been easy to do Meantime too, and that's something the band didn't deliberately do." In fact, Hamilton had so much disdain for popular music at the time, admitting, "A lot of whatever you want to call alternative rock just waters down the same shit that Blue Cheer and the Byrds were doing 25 years ago. To me, it's the same boring 3-chord changes, guitar sounds, and melodies." Years later, Hamilton referred to his mindset on Betty as being a career sabotage of some sort, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Hamilton told the Toronto Star, "I wanted to do a different kind of album as far as continuity between the songs, a little more dynamic, more of a listening experience, as opposed to In Your Face, which is fine, but it's not the only thing we can do." He added how the band wanted to focus more on melody this time, with Bogdan adding, "Meantime was very focused, but there weren't too many dynamics with that record. It pummeled a lot of people." He added, "The more we played, the more conscious we got of groove. In the past, we were kind of just playing songs." The bigger emphasis on groove could also be attributed to their co-producer T-Ray. The hip-hop producer had remixed the Helmet and House of Pain collaboration Just Another Victim for the 1993 film soundtrack Judgment Night. This record paired hip-hop acts with alternative rock acts. Hamilton remarked, "We loved the remixes he did. We clicked immediately. He was incredibly enthusiastic about our music. He composes music for guys to rap over. So we knew that his function in a rock context would be a lot different." But once the band hit the studio to work with T-Ray on Betty, he was so enthusiastic about the band's new songs that the producer literally told the members that they didn't need him there, to which Page humorously responded, "So why are we paying you $10,000? The resulting record, Betty, was a more eclectic album with Hamilton telling louder sound. I'm not comparing myself to those two at all, but Paul Westerberg of The Replacements and Ray Davies of The Kinks. They're both really famous for shooting themselves in the foot, and there's something really appealing about that to me." He added, "I wasn't trying to give people the finger, but I wanted to keep them on their toes." As for the name Betty, in several interviews about the album's title, Betty refers to a pretty girl. Hamilton told Rolling Stone in 1994, "When we were on our tour last year, our crew kept referring to girls as Bettys." Hamilton added, Around the time we were mixing, I was lying in bed thinking Betty would be a very funny title. It was one we could all live with. We have a hard time making group decisions. The accompanying album cover showed a woman in a garden, and it was maybe an effort to defy expectations or keep fans on their toes, despite some fans initially being bewildered by the album's eclectic layers of country, jazz, and blues. Hamilton told Loudersound, a friend of mine has this 14-year-old kid, and he was like, can I bring my kid to see you? This kid comes in and he goes, why did you put a woman on the cover with flowers? And I go, because I thought it was funny. He was like, nah, I didn't like that. I didn't like it as much as the album before. And I go, yeah, I know. It resulted in some fans telling Hamilton to his face that he was no longer metal, despite his assurances in the past that he never claimed he was to begin with. The first fans would hear of Betty would be on the Crow soundtrack, an album that people have actually been begging me to cover on my channel for years. Let me know if you think I should do a video on the Crow soundtrack. The much beloved movie came with an equally compelling soundtrack featuring the likes of Rage Against the Machine, The Cure, Nine Inch Nails, and of course Helmet with their track Milquetoast. Helmet didn't just appear on the soundtrack though, they also attended the movie premiere, and according to Hamilton, the band was even offered the chance to appear in the film, but it was something they surprisingly turned down. He told Loudersound, we weren't striving to be played on MTV. We weren't MTV guys. I was a bit of a snob at 28. The Crow soundtrack topped the album charts in America and sold nearly 4 million copies stateside. Given the success of the Crow soundtrack, the group's label opted to release Milquetoast as the lead single with an accompanying music video featuring clips from the film. The song peaked at number 39 on the mainstream rock tracks chart, and it was the only song that charted in the States from the album. Page recalled to Rolling Stone, I basically had it already finished when we came to write Meantime's lead single. Unsung had that verse, chorus, but instead of a bridge, you had this development section. I really liked that. On Milquetoast, I came up with this bit of repetition and brought in these power chords, and it sounded really cool. I remember someone saying to me, such a cool idea to have a guitar chord solo. I'd never thought about it like that. The version that appeared on the Crow soundtrack was originally cut with the Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana producer Butch Vig, something that Hamilton was a little weary about initially, but they were actually pretty happy with the end result. Meanwhile, on the album Betty, the band explored funk with tunes like Silver Hawaiian, while also showing their jazzier side with Beautiful Love. The second single, Biscuits for Smut, was inspired by Hamilton's grandfather who grew up in Oklahoma. He had a dog named Smut, and one time his grandmother overbaked some biscuits, with his grandfather deciding he couldn't eat them, so he gave them to his dog Smut instead. Hamilton combined this inspiration with a serial killer story, and thus the song was born. Biscuits for Smut didn't end up charting, and the third single, Wilma's Rainbow, didn't either. Wilma's Rainbow was inspired by a store that Hamilton saw while he was visiting New Orleans one time. Despite MTV helping the band early in their career, the same couldn't be said for their album Betty. While Milquetoast did get some play on the channel, in several interviews that were done around 1994, the band talked about the lack of MTV play. They remarked, I think the problem is we're not getting much airplay on MTV or radio, and it seemed like the biggest single we had from the record Milquetoast didn't help our album, it helped the Crow album in which it appeared. The only programs on MTV that played Helmet by 1994 and 1995 were the specialty programs like Alternative Nation and Headbangers Ball. The band admittedly were a little frustrated with MTV, with Stanier telling the Record Journal, it's all politics there and we didn't have the right people on our side. And maybe they figured, well, we've helped these guys once and they don't need our help anymore. It's discouraging because everyone wants their music to be heard. Betty ended up peaking at number 45 on the album chart in the States. It was a commercial disappointment in the eyes of their label. While reviews and fan reaction was initially mixed, over the years it's become a fan favorite. And Helmet's lineup in 2014 actually toured to celebrate its 20th anniversary, playing the album in its entirety. Helmet released one more album during the 90s before breaking up in 1998, but they did reunite in 2004 and are still active to this day. Looking back, Hamilton told Loudersound why Betty connected so strongly with fans, saying, I like to think it's because it sort of flips things upside down. As for the bands who Helmet influenced in their aftermath, specifically the nu metal acts, Hamilton himself wasn't a fan of these groups, and he thinks the band's style didn't translate over to the nu metal acts, adding, "I think people get lost in the whole, oh, I can just drop tune and play with one finger. I haven't heard much of our harmonic language being used, and I haven't heard a lot of altered or extended chords. I just hear the riffage." That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories.